Hi fantasy fiction fans, and welcome to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I'm fantasy writer Neil Mack, the author of Moondog and the Reed Leopard, and I want to share my love of folklore, local history and nature mythology with writers and creatives like you on my regular podcasts. It's designed with fellow indie publishers and writers in mind, but all fans of fantasy fiction are very welcome to join in. In my fantasy writer's kit bag, writers, artists and creatives will find lots of ideas and discussion about things such as potions, dark arts, fabulous creatures, folktale studies, nature lore, and the interesting history behind the myth and magic that underpins our understanding of the fictional universe. Hello, myth and magic writers and myth and magic fans, and welcome back to Myth and Magic, a fantasy writer's kit bag. I've been very busy over the last 3 weeks. I've visited Cornwall, the Duchy of Cornwall, and Dozymary, which I'm going to talk about today. I also visited the southwest of England, and I took a trip to Rome, which will be an entire episode, which I'll tell you about a little bit later this month, and also took a trip to Malaysia in Southeast Asia. So I've been very busy, and that's why I haven't been able to do the regular podcasts, because I've either been travelling or visiting sites. This episode I wanted to just concentrate on the Lady of the Lake. So, the Lady of the Lake. Those of you who enjoyed and have followed the universe portrayed in the story of the Suicide Squad by DC Comics, and in particular Amanda Waller's Suicide Squad that was shown in the movie, then you'll be familiar with the complicated character known as the Enchantress. And in one account, June Moon, if you remember, stumbles across a magical being known as Dizamor, D-Z-A-M-O-R, who can be materialised into being with the word Enchantress. But is there such a creature as the Enchantress? And is the Enchantress based upon any real-world myth and magic? Well, earlier last month and before I went to Rome and Southeast Asia, I travelled to the place where the Enchantress is said to have lived. And it's not a castle, or not a castle in the sense that we understand it. It's a castle below the water inside a lake. Yeah. The Enchantress, the original Enchantress, lived in the bottom of a lake. Weird, yeah? But first we have to learn about another mystical goddess, because she will help us on our journey into trying to discover who the Enchantress, the Lady of the Lake, actually is. This mystical goddess is known as Coventina. Coventina. And she'll help us understand where the idea of the Enchantress comes from, and how we can age her and how we can get to her. Coventina was a Romano-British pagan goddess of wells and springs. She is known from multiple inscriptions at one site in Northumberland around a wellspring known as Cornwall near the Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland. Now, I've touched upon this area of the United Kingdom before, because it's a very magical region. Anyway, near Cornwall, near Hadrian's Wall in Northumberland, is the site of a Mithraeum. Now, a Mithraeum is a man-made structure, so try to keep with me on this. A Mithraeum is a man-made structure, but it's built to resemble a cave. And it's also designed to be an image of the universe. If you ever go to a crypt in a church or go to the catacombs, they are almost certainly copies of early Mithraeums. Anyway, a Mithraeum, designed to be the image of a universe, the idea of this is that the soul descends into one end and exits via the other. So it's a long, low-walled structure and is designed to look like a cave. Now, the Mithraeum in Northumberland was likely used as a place of initiation into the cult of Mithras, which is where it takes its name. Mithras, Mithras. And therefore it serves as a temple to this mystery cult, the mystery cult of Mithras. Now, Mithra, I should tell you, is one of the oldest gods and is known across religions. And Mithra was certainly prayed to and worshipped by the Indo-Iranian culture. And in Sanskrit, Mitra means the eye of the light. Though Mitra in Sanskrit can also mean covenant, Covenant, which means contract. And we think that that probably alludes to the contract that new adherents will enter into on initiation into the secret sect. So because the sect of Mithra is secret, we don't know a lot about it. But we do know certain things, and we've managed to establish those through archaeology. Now, I'll go deeper into Mithras in another episode, but just to say that Mithras is probably the incarnation of Orion, and he's frequently depicted as killing the bull Taurus. And Taurus is found beside him in the night sky. Taurus is next to Orion in the night sky. And I might also add that this powerful god is often portrayed as a lion-headed man and may be one of the earliest Hindu deities because of that. So therefore he's very, very ancient indeed. We're talking about at least 5,000 years before Christ. You might be interested to learn in passing that Mithras was born from rock on December the 25th. Curious, huh? And it's only recently been established by new analysis that the ancient temple to Mithras at the Northumberland site aligns with the sunrise on Christmas Day, December the 25th. In other words, it aligns with the birth of Christ, or as we know him, the light of the world, on Christmas Day. Now, without wishing to distress or annoy any Christians who might be listening, it's worth pointing out that the 25th of December is actually the first date following the winter solstice, which is the symbolic death and rebirth of the sun, that the day lengthens by a minute. And so probably the early Christian church co-opted the Mithras and Sol Invictus festival, known as the Festival of the Rejuvenant Sun, as the birthmark of Christ the Saviour, to establish ascendancy over long-held pagan beliefs. From an astrological point of view, the sun is reborn on the 25th of December and is then visited by 3 wandering planets before it becomes surrounded by the 12 constellations of the zodiac. As a schoolboy, I was taught in Sunday school that the early Christian church took over pagan sites, beliefs and important dates in Britain to show people that the old gods had no power. Anyway, back to Northumberland and the Mithraeum. Now, this is probably the only Mithraeum in Britain. This is probably the only Mithraeum in Britain where artefacts depicting the Celtic goddess Vagdavercustis have been found. And the only known artefact of Vagdavercustis outside of Germany. It was customary for Roman officials in their conquered provinces to honour local gods as a way of maintaining local goodwill. But this seems a stretch in the Northumberland Mithraeum, because why honour the goddess Vagdavercustis in a secret temple to a mystery cult? Because surely normal folk don't have access to a secret temple of a mystery cult. If the local Roman officials wanted to honour a local god as part of some kind of diplomatic and political act, they probably would have done it out and loud and in a public place. But instead they didn't. They hid Vagdavercustis inside the temple to Mithras. Anyway, not much is known about Vagdavercustis, other than she's associated with trees and forests, and she's said to be the protector of war dances. Vagdavercustis. And it seems that at some stage during the Roman occupation of Britain, a second Mithraeum was built over the first part. The second Mithraeum was built over the Vagdavercustis site in and around about 128 AD. And in this Mithraeum, another goddess, the goddess Coventina, was dedicated. And it's interesting, isn't it, that this new goddess, which appears in 128 AD, shares the same place and position as some of the earliest known and some of the most powerful gods, including a connection with the Eye of Light. So because of Coventina, the second Mithraeum became known locally as Coventina's Well. Now, Coventina herself is depicted in a nymph form. She's a water nymph, and she reclines partially clothed and associated with other motifs to do with water. In the book titled The Sky Stone by Jack White, Whytee, the author represents Coventina as the Lady of the Lake. You were wondering when I was going to get to that, and I just have. Now, while considering Vagdavercustis at the Mithraeum, it is also worth touching on a sorceress character mentioned in the Tale of Taliesin that's set in Wales, in the British Isles. And this character is known as Ceridwen. She was a dawn goddess and a white fairy, and she became a pagan goddess and part of the Celtic pantheon. Ceridwen was known to be a shapeshifter. She could turn herself into a fish or into an otter, as well as a bird, and she, Ceridwen, abided inside a castle beneath the water. She abided inside a castle beneath the rather beautifully serene and perhaps fathomless Lake Bala in Wales. So the Lady of the Lake, she might well be associated with the earliest goddess that we've come across in British sites. She also might be associated with this goddess who lives underwater. But we know the Lady of the Lake, and she has a name, by the way, and I'll come to that in a moment. We know the Lady of the Lake from the legend associated with King Arthur and his knights. And the Lady of the Lake in those stories is a mystical, non-human creature who plays a pivotal role in many of the Arthurian legends. For example, she gives Arthur his sword, she enchants and she traps Merlin, the wizard, and she raises Sir Lancelot. But what else do we know about her from the Arthurian legends? Well, the Enchantress is named Viviane or Viviane, and also she's known in French legends as Nimue, Nimue, Nimue. And Viviane lived in a castle under a lake, just like Ceridwen, so she may well be the same creature. She also shares similarities to the Dawn goddess and the pre-Christian Irish goddess known as Brigid, Bride or Bride. If you ever see the word Brigid or Brigid, Brigid, it's also the same word as bride. So St Brigid's Day is also St Bride's Day. Anybody called Bridget in Ireland are also known as Bridie. Now, the Irish goddess Brigid, whose birthday is the first day of spring, which is the 1st of February, by the way, and is known as the Day of the Bride, is associated with sacred wells and is celebrated by modern pagans alongside the horned god. So the Brigid character, the Bridie character, also bears some kind of connection with the Lady of the Lake because she's associated with sacred wells. And by the way, Saint Brigid of Kildare, the patron saint of Ireland, and perhaps an abbess or a nun, may or may not be the same Bridie. And that's because the tradition of Brigid was assimilated and merged by Christians, syncretised, into one myth. And in actual fact, there's very little historical evidence that a real Saint Brigid ever existed, although this is a bit controversial, I know. They have been so well syncretised that it's likely they are both the same person. Saint Brigid and the original pre-Christian Irish goddess Brigid are most likely the same person. Anyway, back to Viviane. Because she lives and exists in an underwater realm, she's a symbol of mystery and magic. And that's probably why she inspired poems such as The Lady of the Lake by Sir Walter Scott, which was later turned into an opera by Rossini. And it's probably why she becomes a main character in The Mists of Avalon by the author Marion Zimmer Bradley. By the 13th century, the Lady of the Lake began to appear in French chivalric romances. In these romances, she aided humans like a kind of fairy godmother. And if you've seen Spamalot, the Monty Python show, you'll see that although she appears in the lake every now and again, she also sort of can come out of nowhere. She zings into being with a fairy wand, and she sort of like grants the knight's wishes like a fairy godmother. I think that Eric Idle and the Monty Python team have done very well there to depict the Lady of the Lake not only as a person or creature who lives in the lake, but also who appears to give you your three wishes. Later, in Sir Thomas Malory's 15th century definitive Arthurian tales, Arthur and Merlin first meet the Lady of the Lake when she holds Excalibur out of the water and offers it to Arthur, and says that he will give him power if he promises to fulfil her requests later. So where did the Lady of the Lake live? Where did she hold Excalibur out of the water for him? Well, there are a number of locations in Great Britain that are traditionally associated with the Lady of the Lake. Barla in Wales, that I mentioned earlier, is one of them, but the most famous and the most recognised is a place called Dozymary Pool. Dozymary. Also could be Dozymary. And it's interesting, isn't it, that DC Comics said that June Moon stumbled across a magical being known as Dozymary. Anyway, I was lucky enough to go to Dozymary Pool in the Duchy of Cornwall earlier last month. Now, it's situated on a remote and wild place called the Bodmin Moor. And I'll probably return to the Bodmin Moor in a future show, because it's also the place where a legendary beast wanders around. And Bodmin Moor is on the southwest peninsula of England, and it's close to Jamaica Inn at Bolventor. Now, Jamaica Inn is a real place. I went there and visited it. In fact, I had a drink and a meal there, and it's the inspiration for Daphne du Maurier's 1936 novel of the same name, and later Alfred Hitchcock's 1939 feature film. And in fact, Jem Merlin in the story does visit Dozymary Pool. Anyway, this pool which I visited, and I'm going to put some video footage of my visit onto the show notes, so if you go to neilmach.me, neilmach.me, do a search, you'll probably be able to find those once I put the video footage on. But this pool, Dozymary Pool, is very strange. Now, when I went there, it was very silent, eerily silent. It's very, very beautiful, and it seems very, very remote. It's surrounded by the Bodmin Moor, the moorland, and in the distance across the lake is one larger hill than most of the other hills, and it sort of tends to waymark the pool. But it was quite hard to find the pool, but when I did find it, I was very impressed. It's likely that the water feature hasn't changed since at least the last ice age, and that's because this area is not very good for farming, it's not very good for agriculture, and because the pool is fed from underground waters, it's an important ecological site. Now, in legend, it's here that the King Arthur rode out to the Lady of the Lake to receive the sword of Excalibur. So you can imagine a very silent, very peaceful pool in the middle of a very remote moor. and it just sits there, very still, very dark, almost quite welcoming. And of course there are no waves on it, almost no ripples at all. You can imagine a person rowing out to receive a sword. And when King Arthur lay dying after the Battle of Camlan, Sir Bedivere cast the mystical sword back into Dozymary Pool. Thus he returned the sword Excalibur from whence it came. I was very pleased to visit Dozymary Pool, and it's very likely that it's the actual pool where the Lady of the Lake lives. I'm saying this because it's down near Avalon, which is an ancient isle, and you have to picture that Britain, at the period that the Romans invaded and gradually conquered, is a country made of two things: forest, deep, dark forest, which basically encompassed almost 80% of the land, or boggy swampland. So Dozymary Pool, because we know that it hadn't changed since the last ice age, sat there as a symbol of something outside of the norm. There are other claims to the Lady of the Lake's dwelling place, and one of these is known as Llyn Llywelyn or Llyn Llywelyn Yew Tree Lake, and it's a lake in Western Anglesey in Wales. Now, I have visited this, but I need to go back because I wanted to look at it a bit more closely. Anglesey is an island on the northwest tip of Wales, and I'll probably return to it in another show because Anglesey is also the home to the Druids. The lake is situated in an area that has been settled since at least the Stone Age and right through the Neolithic period and the Bronze Age and into the Iron Age. And in the Yew Tree Lake on Western Anglesey, there are uncommon aquatic plants because it's a silty lake and it has a hazy little island in the middle of it. There are two Neolithic burial mounds beside the lake, and these probably date from about 3100 BC. So this area has been settled since at least the time of the Scorpion King, when the Scorpion King ruled Upper Egypt, and since around about the time that Stonehenge began to be built. I think this is a good candidate for the actual place where the Lady of the Lake lived, and there's two reasons I think that. One is because it was not properly conquered by the Romans. It is the place where the Druids lived, and we know that it's as old as 3100 BC. But Dozymary Pool, the place I actually visited, is probably the more romantic, the more beautiful, and it's probably the one which Sir Thomas Malory is referring to when he said that the Lady of the Lake passed Excalibur to King Arthur. Finally, and because I'm only going to do one subject today, because I've got lots and lots to catch up on after my visit to Rome and then later Southeast Asia. So I'm only doing the one subject today, the Lady of the Lake, but I wanted to finish with this, and I've already mentioned it before in an earlier show, but it's worth repeating. The full French name of the University of Notre Dame, and it was founded in 1842, is Notre Dame du Lac. When you see Notre Dame, especially when it's related to academic places, it's worth remembering that they are referring to the Lady of the Lake, the ancient Enchantress who lives beneath the waters. Enjoy your fiction, enjoy writing your fantasy fiction, and keep looking out for myth and magic. Bye-bye.